Hello everybody! As a developer, we handle loads of files, loads of small files. This is Stef from Samayas, and welcome to my channel. Well, a while ago, Microsoft created a new file system called Dev Drive based on the ReFS. The Dev Drive is designed to optimize build operations and developer workflow, to leverage ReFS modern architecture for enhanced reliability, scalability, and data protection. This new storage volume features asynchronous scanning for Windows Defender antivirus. So what are the features? Well, the Dev Drive supports for a massive file and volumes for up to 35 petabytes. Everybody has those, right? It has a customizable configuration so that developers and administrators can fine-tune filter drivers to maximize performance or add compatibility as needed. It allows for asynchronous Defender to perform security checks in the background while preserving speed without sacrificing safety. And by using modern user management, the Dev Drive can be set up through the management as streamlined to the rest of the setup console inside Windows. So what are the performances and usages? The targeted optimization in the Dev Drive should lead to substantial performance improvements for development scenarios, especially for build time and repository management. Microsoft recommends storage code, package caches, and working directories on Dev Drives. However, some legacy application might require additional filters. What are the file system's foundations? Well, the Dev Drive is built on ReFS, whereas NTFS is using the long-standing default Windows format. ReFS supports features like block cloning, copy on write, and improved reliability, and better for large file management. NTFS lacks some of the advanced features that makes ReFS better suited to high performance and development environments. So what are limitations? Well, the Dev Drive may not work seamlessly with features such as OneDrive syncing, and some legacy apps may have some compatibility issues. To use Dev Drive, a separate partition or VHD formatted as ReFS is required, and NTFS cannot be converted directly. So let's dig in. So my current laptop has one drive of 4 terabytes, which is 3.7.26 gigabytes. Since the number game is played between 1000 and 1024, of that I have a system partition which is roughly 1.66 gigabytes, and I have 2058 gigabytes or almost 2 terabytes available. So let's first create an NTFS partition, and for that I'll take 1 terabyte. And I can do this using the UI, new simple volume. Next, I specify 1 terabyte, assign drive D, and format as NTFS. And so my partition is created. Now the alternative is to do it through the command line. I'll start a command line using administrative privileges. I need to start disk part. I need to list all my disks. I need to select my first disk. On other systems you might have more, but in this system I only have one disk. It's disk 0. Next I have a peek at my partitions, so I type list partition, and as you can see my first partition is my system partition of 100 megabyte. Apparently there's a hidden second partition which is reserved of 16 megabyte. The third partition is my primary C, and the fourth partition is my primary. So now let's create an NTFS drive. So I'm just doing a quick 1 million, just like before. I know that's not technically correct, but in this case it doesn't matter. And again, I have my partition of 1 terabyte, more or less. I list my partitions again. My fifth partition is selected, and I just need to do a format. And the partition is formatted, and I just need to assign a letter. And so in this scenario, I've created my NTFS partition. Now creating a Dev Drive is located completely differently. We don't have to look in the computer manager, but we have to look in the settings. Everything is in the new UI. And under settings, we go to system, and under system, we have storage. And under storage, we have advanced settings. And under advanced settings, we have drives and volumes. And out there, you have a big create dev drive, or you can do it here as well, where you could create a symbol volume or create a dev drive. So let's give that a shot. It takes the remaining 1.1 terabyte. Let's call it dev drive. Let's label it E, and let's go ahead. And it asks me to format it. Say yes. and my dev drive is created. Now once the dev drive is created, if you go back to Computer Manager, we don't really see a difference. We have first the D drive, which is the NTFS drive, and then now we have the newly created E drive, which is just marked as ReFS. If you go to Properties, well, we have the name we defined, we have the free space, we still can do a check or an optimize, hardware is still my NVMe, I can share it as usual, I have normal security settings, I can see potential previous versions, and I can customize it. Nothing much different. So let's re-delete it. Now let's have a shot at creating a command line. And that should be quite easy. We start again a command prompt, and the first part is almost the same thing. We just need to start disk part, we need to list disks, we need to select the first disk, and we need to create a primary partition. And this time, since I want to fill up the rest of my disk space, I'm not at all going to specify the size. Without specifying the size, it just fills it up completely. Once a partition is created, we list the volume to see the active volume. Volume 4 is latest, which is just created as a raw. And then next we need to assign a drive letter. And so as you can see, I have another raw partition. And now the second part should be quite easy. The only thing I should do is start a PowerShell and format that using a PowerShell. So let's run a PowerShell in admin. And the only thing I should have to do is call format volume, where I specify the drive letter, which is the E drive which I've just assigned, specify the file system, which is ReFS, and specify the volume name. And just as I did with normal NTFS, this should work, right? Well, wrong. He's trying, and then he's failing. So as you can see, this little overview table gives you a detailed view of when you can run the dev drive via settings and when you can run it via CLI. Unfortunately for licensing, the Home and the Pro version don't support the CLI. The Pro for Workstation/Server and the Enterprise Windows Edition do support it through the CLI. Now if you're in a corporate environment, in general, you have an Enterprise or a Workstation Edition, and that won't really make an issue. However, being able to do it command line and automate things if you need to install 10, 20, 50 computers is quite important. After switching to an Enterprise version license key, this has worked, and so it's clearly a licensing issue. Unfortunately, the previous command, format volume, was not entirely correct. The flag that was missing was the flag dev drive. Without that, the format volume still creates a ReFS volume, which behaves completely like that. However, the dev drive flag flags that drive as safe to Microsoft Defender. And without that flag, Microsoft Defender keeps scanning everything in sync and nothing asynchronously. I only discovered that when I already had done all my performance statistics, and I had to redo half of them just to get the right stats. So let's execute this, and I'll have a new format. And in order to be sure that you have a dev drive, after formatting, you can call fsutil dev drive query with your drive letter. And here you can clearly see now that I have a trusted developer volume. So now I'm going to start and look at the performance between an NTFS drive, a ReFS dev drive, and a ReFS non-dev drive. When starting to work on this, initially, by error, I created a ReFS which was not a dev drive. And then I started to realize that whether or not a ReFS was a dev drive or non-dev drive, it had quite different performances. Also, ReFS as a dev drive has asynchronous virus scanning, while ReFS not as a dev drive has synchronous virus scanning. So let's try to dig in. So first we're going to copy. So I've copied a web project from my old laptop to the new laptop, which roughly contains 70 megabytes of files and 7,000 a lot of small files. So let's go. And so the initial copy from NTFS to ReFS dev drive takes 77 seconds. So now let's do a second copy from NTFS to ReFS, which is not a dev drive. And that only takes 3 seconds. So now let's copy the projects from the ReFS dev drive to the ReFS non-dev drive. And that takes approximately 7 seconds. Now let's copy back the files from my ReFS dev drive to my NTFS drive. And again, we're at about 3 seconds. And finally, let's copy back files from my ReFS non-dev drive to my NTFS drive. And so now we are at 87 seconds. So as you can see, there's quite a difference in between when we copy from where to where. So after some browsing and searching, part of the excuse why some of the copies might be extremely slow would be Windows Defender. So let's try and exclude those paths in all 3 locations and then try again. And so I'll exclude for all 3 locations. And so for all 3 locations, I've excluded my project directory. And so let's restart to copy from an NTFS to ReFS dev drive. And now I'm at 3.1 seconds instead of 77. Now let's recopy from NTFS to ReFS non-dev drive, and I was at 3.8. I'm at 3.5, which is more or less the same. Now let's recopy from my ReFS dev drive to my ReFS non-dev drive. And I went from 7 seconds to 3.3. Now let's rerun and copy from my ReFS dev drive to my NTFS drive. And I was at 3.1 seconds, and now I'm at 3.3 seconds, which is more or less the same. And finally, let's copy from my ReFS non-dev drive to my NTFS drive. And here again, I went from 87 seconds to 3 seconds, which is quite good. So in the end, on average now, I'm between 3.1 and 3.5, and there's not much difference. But this clearly shows that Windows Defender is a huge bottleneck if you don't watch out. So now let's have a look at the large copies. I'll be copying an Insider ISO from my NTFS drive to my ReFS dev drive. And that took 0.8 seconds. Now I'm going to copy it from my NTFS to my ReFS non-dev drive. And that took 1.3 seconds. Now I'm going to copy it from my ReFS dev drive to my ReFS non-dev drive. And that takes 0.77 seconds. And now I'll be copying it from my ReFS dev drive to my NTFS drive. And here I'm at 1.1 seconds. And finally, I'll be copying it from my ReFS non-dev drive to my NTFS drive. And here again I'm at 1.1. So for larger files, copying from ReFS to NTFS takes more time. Now let's have a look at the performance of compression on the NTFS, the ReFS dev drive, and the ReFS non-dev drive. Let's first start with the NTFS drive. And on the first run, it takes 13 seconds. Now let's run it a second time. And sometimes because of caching, the second run is a little bit faster. And here it's 12.82, which is about 0.7 seconds faster. Now let's compress the ReFS dev drive. And that took 12.87 seconds. Let's give it a second run. And that's a little bit slow at 12.93. And now finally, let's compress on the ReFS non-dev drive. And the first run gives us 13.13. And the second run gives us 13.02. And there's no clear winner here. Now let's have a look at the build performance. I've created a little PowerShell script. First, I'm cleaning my web project. Next, I'm cleaning my test project. Then I'm building my web project. And finally, I'm building my test project. And I do that in loop 10 times. And I output the total amount of time and the average. So let's give it a shot. And so I have an average of 4.42 seconds for my NTFS partition. Now let's rerun on my ReFS dev partition. And I have an average of 3.45, which is faster. And now finally let's run on my ReFS non-dev partition. And here I'm at 3.59, which is still faster than NTFS, but which is slower than ReFS dev partition. Now I've slightly modified my script. I'm still running 10 times. I'm just gonna build one project which is bigger, a first .NET clean, and then build and then loop that again 10 times. And here I have an average of 2.71 for my NTFS partition. Now let's give it a shot on the ReFS dev partition. And here I'm at 2.6 seconds, which is a little bit faster, but not much. And then finally I'm going to rerun it on the ReFS non-dev partition. And we have a little bit slower than the ReFS dev partition, but still faster than the NTFS partition. So in both scenarios for the build, the ReFS dev partition is the winner, but not with huge difference. Next I'm gonna run a .NET restore, same script as before, but instead of build, just .NET restore on my larger project, looping 10 times. So let's go for NTFS. And so on average it takes 0.62 seconds. Now let's rerun on the ReFS dev partition. And there's no difference whatsoever, 62 seconds. And finally on the ReFS non-dev partition. And again, 62 seconds. And now, almost same script as before, I've removed the .NET clean, I'm just gonna run a .NET test, and instead of 10, I'm gonna loop only 5 times. So let's start with the NTFS. And here I have an average of 6.85 seconds per test run. Now let's run on the ReFS dev drive. And we have a total of 6.6 seconds, which is a little bit better. And then finally, let's run on the ReFS non-dev drive. And this is more. Here we come at 794 seconds, which is the slowest of the three. But again, the ReFS dev drive is slightly better, but really slightly. And according to spec, cloning a repo should be faster as well on the dev drive. Now let's rerun it on ReFS dev drive. And that only took 22 seconds, however the download speeds were faster this time. And let's finally try the ReFS non-dev drive. And I'm at 22 seconds as well, so let's rerun the first one. And I'm at 24 seconds, but we might consider since the delta is a download, it's more or less the same. Now if we look at the performance results, if you compare small copy with small copy without Defender, the first one, when copying NTFS to ReFS dev and from ReFS non-dev to NTFS, explodes things. If you compare it to the small copy without Defender, you end up more or less everywhere at 3.3. It's amazing that a small copy of almost 70 megabytes takes more time than a large copy of 5 gigabytes, which is just one file. If you look at all the other performance tests, the difference between NTFS, ReFS dev drive and ReFS non-dev drive is really marginal. In almost all scenarios, the ReFS dev drive wins, but with a percentage of not even 10% difference. Now what are the differences between ReFS and NTFS? Well, the first one, if you look at properties on a ReFS drive, compression is not an option. If you look at properties on the NTFS drive, here you can compress everything. If you look at the drive properties, everything looks the same, with the exception that the file system for the ReFS is clearly ReFS and for NTFS is clearly NTFS. Both sides have the same tools, the hardware is the same, we can share the same, security is the same, we have notion of previous versions, we can customize. So what is different? NTFS allows us to set user quotas. ReFS doesn't, which is the second big difference. So if this is a shared server, that might be an issue. If it's your local development machine, in general, that's no issue. Now once the drives are created, if you go to System menu, then Storage, under Storage you have the advanced settings, there you have disks and volumes, and there you can clearly see I have 2 ReFS drives and I have 1 NTFS drive. If we go to the Virus Defender, and we go to Virus and Threats, and then we go to Manage Settings, here the dev drive is on by default, and you can't even switch it on. And if you go and see volumes, here you can clearly see that the F drive, which is the ReFS drive without dev drive, is in asynchronous scanning off. However, the E drive, which is a dev drive, is in asynchronous scanning on. Well, the dev drive's initial spec seems quite impressive. So, should you or should you not use a dev drive rather than a normal NTFS drive? Personally, I'm not convinced. If your computer is correctly configured and has an exclusion of your antivirus on your dev directory, the performance improvements are marginal between NTFS and dev drive ReFS. If however you don't have any control about your antivirus, then the alternative of a dev drive with asynchronous scanning might be a good plan. If you guys enjoy this content, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell sign. or leave a comment down below.